remarkable tribute that to Omar Davidson. A few people I want to thank for making this happen. First is this person right here, Jeannie Chan. He has harassed Alan West before me and me now for approaching 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's her testament that she got it done, so it's amazing. The other person is that young gentleman there, Edwin Melendez. So gave him this very broad stroke idea of what I wanted from this room, and he picked it up and he ran with it. Of course, that involved taking many afternoons off on Friday. I never asked where he went, but at the end of the day, this is what he gave us. So it is really spectacular. I hope this is a very useful, multi-purpose room that our departments will use. And for that, I want to thank each and every one of you. So with that, Jean.
Okay, well actually, Professor Jay, you're actually next.
I'm next. What happened to
The dean is running late, so we're switching the order now.
He's on academic time, so.
Okay, I'm going to pass on hand, but start here. Okay, I'm Chair. I obviously am thankful to everyone who contributed to the Davidson funding to make this movie possible. I just want to say a few things about Omar. I also want to mention a little bit about his special class of 73, which was rather spectacular group of students. I first had Omar as a student in the fall of 1972 when he took a chemical process kinetics and reactor design course from me. In fact, I have this gray sheet. So nobody can run away. As they can San and Ray, they're all in here. Omar was a good student. He was very soft-spoken, as most of you know, and very quiet. But he knows what he knew what he wanted. I think he worked very hard in that course, and he didn't ask too many questions in class. However, he did find me in my office whenever he had questions about the subject. So I can tell he was going quite deeply into the principles of really every chemical engineering course he took. After he graduated with a bachelor's degree, he decided to continue to do his master's study here, and he ended up, and this time chose me as an advisor. And 2 years earlier, there was a Professor Robert Stowe, and you might know him, of civil engineering, and George Bryan of Lamont Geological Observatory. They discovered the existence of craft grades, also known as gas hydrates, at the bottom of the ocean. They recruited me as a collaborator to try to answer a few questions. For instance, at the temperature and pressure at different locations at the ocean bottom, there possibility for existence of these gas hydrates. Gas hydrates are primarily methane, natural gas hydrates. And the good news is that I got an answer for them. The bad news is that it's everywhere, okay? Everywhere under the ocean, if the temperature and pressure, at the ocean temperature and pressure, if there's gas, there's going to be gas hydrates. On the other hand, it opened up a wide door because Bob Stowe and George Bryan's acoustic studies using acoustic reflection of the ocean bottom become a major tool for gas exploration. And today, if you look at natural gas sources, methane hydrate in the ocean is a major source for gas. In any event, at the time, I gave out 2 master's projects, one to Omar, one to his classmates, Ani Bedrosian. Bedrosian studied the rate of formation of methane gas hydrate, and Omar did it for the ethane hydrate as a pair. But in any event, he did an excellent job. It was high pressure measurements. It was very tedious and time consuming, and Omar never complained. He did his work, and he finished his study and went to work at Merck. And his whole career was Merck, with Merck. Let me say a few words about my knowledge of him as a person and as a friend. He was very helpful and selfish. He had a very good sense of humor. I think most of you who worked with him would very likely know. In 1999, when I took a leave, I left Columbia, I went to work for industry. Omar sent me a book, the Merck Manual for Geriatrics, which I thought rather appropriate. But in any event, after he left Columbia, went to Merck until his retirement, we had constant contact via telephone. Occasionally, when he came to Columbia, we would meet. I think in the late 80s, he went for an executive MBA program at Columbia, and we would see each other quite regularly on Friday. Then we, of course, corresponded with email until shortly before he left Merck, and I retired from industry in 2005. Also, I think Omar was very, very helpful through my instigation. He talked to a number of senior executives in industry and tried to tell them how important it is to support academic research. So in that sense, he was very helpful. I see his classmate, Davidson, just arrived. Just mention your name. But in any event, it was a great pleasure to have Omar as a student. Annie, you want to know your grade? Anyway, let me just move on. I don't want to spend too much time here. Let me say a little bit about his class. I think quite a few members are here. Let's say Sam and Annie, Rick Bowles. There was a class of, I saw a picture here of his graduating class, about 20-some people, and I looked at the list. I came on looking at the list, I was very marveled by it, okay? Howard Altman, Danny Aronowitz went to Princeton and got their PhD there, both of them. Rick Bowles also later on. Then going down the list, I see H.T. Shah, who did his PhD with Terry Greger at Columbia. Sung Kian with, of course, with John Happel at Columbia. Ani Bedrosian and Penrose and Andrew Carcas with me. They got their PhD here. And Leslie Sowell with Marianne Farrow-Epstein on crystallization studies. Right? Last but not the least, the person who's not here is Xavier Tang, who did not go to graduate school, but made more money than all of us combined. He's in fact on the board of trustees for Columbia, so he must be quite rich. So in any event, I had great respect for Omar. I always enjoyed him initially as a student and later on as a friend. And I was pleased to see the generosity of his friends and in memory of him. Thank you very much. Because I saw him being a contributor, but he's not here, was Alan Meyerson.
That's right.
Alan did not go to graduate school here. He went to University of Virginia, worked for Don Kerwin, I think.
Yeah.
I went through a whole series of universities and was as high as provost at IIT. It's now at MIT. But in any event, so that was a good class. Very unusual, highly talented class. Okay, thank you.
So what I wanted to do was to talk about Omar, as many of us who work with him and Merck knew him. And that had to do with the fact that he had a very unique management style, and that he was really an excellent mentor and a teacher of the scientists in terms of learning about engineering, but also about management. So just who was Omar? So Omar trained and worked as a chemical engineer. He developed into a process economist. He was a great manager, mentor, and leader at Merck. And he had many hobbies. So he was a man with many hobbies. And you can see there's a picture of him of one of his favorite hobbies, and that is fishing in Alaska. And And he was also a very generous contributor, and he gave money to a lot of different organizations and causes, and Columbia was really one of his favorite institutions to donate money to as his alma mater. So it's really fitting that we were able to raise money to renovate this room in honor of him at Columbia. So, leaving Columbia, Omar started his career at Merck, and he was there until his retirement some 31 years later. He worked in the laboratory, he worked in the pilot plant, he worked in manufacturing on process startup. He pioneered the area of pharmaceutical process economics, and he was a manager of a very large technical organization. So these were his assignments that he got from Merck, but not specifically assigned. He was also really a great mentor to all the scientists that he worked with. And what did he actually do at Merck? And you could characterize this in three buckets. One is he developed elegant, simple engineering solutions to complex chemistry problems. And Jose, who's going to speak after me, is going to talk about some of those. He served as a resource of facts and figures and experience to colleagues across the company. And he managed and mentored young engineers and encouraged them to step outside their comfort zone. And that's what I'm going to talk about, is this aspect of Omar as a manager and a mentor. And we could summarize this as the 5 rules in Omar's art of managing. And the asterisk there is because I do want to recognize Cindy Starbuck, who was able to articulate these 5 rules when she wrote up her memorial of Omar 4 years ago for the memorial book that he gave to his family. Okay, so the first rule in Omar's art of managing is develop a personal connection with your staff and show your insight. So Omar had a unique ability to make a genuine personal connection with people, regardless of their age, their sex, their position, or title. And he did this by walking the hallways. He was rarely found in his office. He walked the hallways and talked to people, not just about their assignment at Merck, but also about their interests and their family. So he learned about them and found some common interests. And that wasn't at Merck, because Omar had a lot of interests outside of Merck. He was into food and dining. He had a lot of hobbies, music, movies, books, sports, cars, puzzles, you name it. He probably had a hobby there, and of course, family. And once he knew there was something that interested you and you had in common, he would often bring in something to share, whether it was a book or a CD or even a sample of food that you may have discussed. And I show here, it's hard to see, but it's actually a DVD set of called Motion and Change, Capitalist Made Clear. And Omar gave me this set about 8 years ago. I think I was telling him about my 8-year-old son at that time, who I was trying to prep for our public school accelerated math program. So he thought that might be helpful. It was a little too early for calculus, but at first I was worried that he needed me to brush up on my calculus. But I'm happy to report that 8 years later, my son now is 16, and he is a junior in high school taking calculus PC, so we are going to watch that DVD together. And the picture I have here is one with a bunch of engineers, and actually it's very hard to find a group picture of Omar. But you can see we're all pretty excited about getting our picture taken with Omar. Okay, the second rule is use feedback wisely. You want to be judicious and give him positive feedback. You don't want to overdo it, because if you give too much positive feedback, it becomes meaningless. And you want to make sure people understand when you give constructive feedback, it's not personal. And you can also give feedback indirectly. And I'm going to tell the story of Cindy and Mike from their, one year they're both working for Omar, and they have their personal evaluation score, and you have a discussion with your manager, and they both scored very well and knew they had done well for the year. But in Cindy's discussion, Omar talked about what a great job Mike had done for the year. And in Mike's discussion, he talked about what a great job Cindy had done. So this was a way for him to give the feedback, but not overdo the, positive feedback. And then the fourth part of that is that Omar had some cold words and phrases, and one of them is this kiddo. I don't know if people have been called kiddo by Omar, but this was actually common at Merck, and we didn't quite figure out in the beginning why he would call you kiddo. Was that not good? It turned out that if he liked you, like he did, he would call you kiddo, and after a while we would sort of deconvolute the results of the meeting by, well, did he call you kiddo at the end of the meeting? So then you would know he did okay. So the third rule in Omar's art of managing is to fail to prepare is to prepare to fail. And really that is trying to make sure you understand the problem of what you're doing. And one of his favorite phrases is, the problem is this. And then you would go and try and delineate what that problem is. You need to understand what was the most important thing to achieve in that given problem, project, or discussion. You had to really understand that, and you had to have the data to support that. So if you didn't have these two items, you weren't prepared for what you were trying to solve. And you always have to be prepared to debate and have a lively discussion, be concise and to the point, and you don't want to give a historical timeline when you're having these discussions with Omar. Or in general, I have found these rules to be very useful. The fourth is that you want to understand what your core job is and seek to develop differential skills. So you want to do what you've been assigned to do, and you want to do it better than the last guy who did it before you. So you should always focus on what you've been assigned to do, because that really is where you're going to get the credit. You want to make sure you develop new skills and look for opportunities. So he was always very proactive in pointing out things people can do to enhance their skill set and to look for more interesting assignments. And finally, the fifth rule, which we call the Omar's Gemma rule, is that you should enjoy what you do. And when you stop enjoying something, you should do something else. So Omar clearly enjoyed what he did at Merck and outside Merck. And he really was a very inspirational leader and teacher for many of us. And for those of us who have followed aspects of these rules and have found success, we really owe part of that success to Omar. Okay. So in summary, 5 rules. What I need from this is that these are the 5 rules in the art of managing according to Omar. Develop personal connection, use feedback wisely, fail to prepare to fail, understand your core job, and enjoy what you do. And as a manager and as a person, Omar had high expectations of what he wanted us to do. He was demanding but nurturing, brilliant, fun, generous, and caring. And finally, I do want to take this opportunity to acknowledge all the contributors to the Omar Davidson Memorial Fund, many folks who were colleagues with him at Merck, classmates of him from Columbia, and also family members. And then acknowledge Merck, Bristol Myers Squibb, and J&J, who have provided matching funds to some of these contributions. And certainly, of course, to Columbia, in particular, Sanat, who finally was able to get this project going, and Edwin, who executed a lot of these activities. So, that's it.
So we're going to break from the program. This is our senior vice dean, Shifu Cheng, who's come here a little late to say
Thank you very much. I just finished my class, so I was trying to answer the question for my students. I'm so happy to see the family and the support and alumni and the colleague here. Our dean, both are, he really want to come here in person, but he has other means sent me here to extend his appreciation. I'm in law school and affiliated with the electrical engineering department and computer science department. I served as the department chair for 3 years until 2010. And I really feel very, very excited about any general support like this, particularly in the facility and the student activity. And I have been on this senior vice dean, actually. I don't have a senior, I don't have enough gray hair, but I have seen enough challenge in the school and working with all the students and also the chairs. And one of the biggest challenge at Columbia, despite all our recent success and momentum in the improvement of the ranking, in improvement of the student population and so forth, is the facility and provide the best resource for our students. And any support for this one is the critical task for us to continue the success. Some of the good news about the school, as you can see recently, we launched a new effort with the city support for the $100 million effort to build a new data science institute with the new building and this building. And one, again, the critical challenge is the facility like this one to support the students' social activity and academic program and research program. I was late for maybe 5 minutes, but I was very lucky to come in time to catch actually 4 of the 5 managing rooms. So I have to catch up with you later on for the first one, the top one. But I was so actually amazed by his exemplary contribution, not only to the department but also the overall industry. So I want to say thank you and also appreciate all your support and we'll celebrate all this one going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm very honored to be with you and remember our friend Omar. I actually knew Omar for 9 years of my career. We left Merck together in 2005. And I knew of him at the very beginning. I mean, Omar was already established personality. He was very influential in our department, so I knew from the time that I arrived. But it was not really until my last 5 years at Merck, when I started interacting with him very closely, that I was really marked as a professional by his scientific philosophy. So Omar was very deeply focused on fundamentals. It was an expectation of him that the scientist, engineer would be able to think about an experimental observation either in the laboratory or in the plant from a chemical engineering fundamental. He would develop explanatory hypotheses and develop an experimental plan to be able to differentiate between those hypotheses. And for that experimental plan, Omar was something that made him unique. He really thought about the large scale, and it's not always thought as a place where we conduct experiments, but he did that a lot. But I also want to say that Omar cared not just about developing the science, but also about form. Because ultimately Omar cared about sharing knowledge. And he understood that when we share knowledge, the effectiveness of that sharing depends a lot on how that work is presented. So to be able to disseminate something, it has to be presented effectively. There were a couple of instances we came to my office. He took the time to come to my office, and he personally sat down with me and said, this report that you see you could have redacted this differently. And this was even for things that he understood what I meant. He was the only recipient, but he still took the time to come and address the way that I present things. And I hope that in some ways he succeeded in improving my presentation. Omar was a keen supporter for academia. I was only peripherally involved with this work. I think Cindy would be able to talk more about it, but he supported what at the time was, and now is a very successful academic at MIT, Professor Bratz. And when Professor Bratz received the Research Excellence in Process Development Award a few years ago, he actually referenced the support that he had gotten from Merck and from Omar's organization in driving his academic research. Again, in terms of mentoring, I think Omar, every time we came up with a kind of crystallization, this type of crystallizations are not very common in the pharmaceutical industry. We will see Omar walk around with his personal copy of Colette's book. And he would sit down with the engineer and actually talk about the different types of crystallizations that could possibly occur and how to optimize the crystallization. And I think this, again, he had a passion for mentoring, a passion for exchanging information. And when we encounter with other people here a very odd system, he actually, we sat with him and said, well, this is it, we figured it out, we know how we're going to address it. But he actually asked, what would it take? How much time would you need to actually get this to publishable work? I mean, and he gave us sufficient time to obtain this data, and we actually went on and published this work. Similarly, we had a very complex crystallization. I'm not going to go into too many details, but the crystallization was very sensitive to scale. We get different types of crystals. And even after, again, we had established a way to move forward to production, Omar asked, well, how could you, what hypothesis do you have to remove this scale sensitivity? And he gave us time in the pilot plan to show that a mixing elbow would actually result in much better scalability of the process. And again, Otto in particular took this on and was able to translate that into a nice publication. But I think Omar, when we talk about knowledge sharing, I don't think that he was only interested in science. Omar was a great raconteur. He would share, I mean, we already discussed, he would come and have long conversations. And I personally think that he was not just interested in the pleasure of conversation. He was interested in sharing knowledge. He wanted to tell you what he learned either that weekend or many decades ago. He could contextualize something that he had learned and portray in some interesting aspects. He wanted to hear from you. He wanted to hear what ideas you had. And I think in that respect, you'll agree with me that this is an ideal place to remember him. This is a space in an organization of higher learning. Students, faculty are going to be here. They're going to share their ideas. And that's something that Omar cared a lot about. And I'm very grateful to have met him. And I'm grateful to the people that will help us to remember him that way. So thank you.
I should have brushed up on my crystallization. My name is Greg Hazel. I'm married to Omar's sister, and some of you I met a few years ago. But you know, when I thought of coming here, the thing that ran through my mind wasn't methane hydrates. It was something rather strange. It was that iconic picture of Leonardo da Vinci's, the picture that is known as The Last Supper. And I know you're all sitting there carefully managing your facial expressions because you're going, The Last Supper, what does that have to do with anything? Okay. You're questioning my sanity, perhaps. Perhaps imagining what a game of word association would sound like with me, you know, some guy with Tourette's syndrome. You may be even playing a game of word association yourself. You know I'm from Jamaica and you're going, he must be smoking something. But the picture which, you know, those of you who have read Dan Brown's best-selling novel, The Da Vinci Code, has become even more popular recently. But it is a fresco. It's a mural that was painted on the dining hall of a monastery in Milan, and it's a picture of a Jewish rabbi and 12 of his followers, and they're having a meeting. It's a bit rambunctious. You know, people are standing around. It seems as if there's an argument, and it's curiously asymmetrical because everybody's standing on one side of the table. Are any of these details helping you make the connection? I know I still sound crazy, but the reason that this picture came to my mind is to me this picture is all about remembering. It's all about this deliberate process of recalling to our consciousness something or someone whose memory may have receded to, you know, the archives of our mind. We're told that the people in the picture are celebrating a Seder, you know, a ceremonial Jewish meal that was observed as their device for commemorating, for remembering a significant cultural and historical event in their history. Furthermore, we're told that at this particular Seder, those people that were there in their eyewitness accounts that they would later write, mentioned that the rabbi, knowing that this was the last meal he was going to share with them, that in 24 hours he would be executed, instructed them that whenever they did this in the future, they were to remember him. You know, a celebration that millions of people around the world still do as, you know, the Christian Eucharist or something we call Holy Communion. So to me, what the picture says is, it's a statement really from, you know, two major religious communities who somehow are intersecting in this particular picture, that remembering is a sacred duty. It is our sacred duty to remember. And that's what we're doing here today. Now, the neurologists, you know, those memory experts tell us that the strength and the longevity of our memories is somehow tied to the level of emotion that you feel around the event that creates the memory. So to those of us who are in Omar's family, to those of us who, to whom he was a brother or a son or an uncle or a brother-in-law, we don't necessarily need a device to recall this gentle, generous man that you know, was such a big part of our lives. But the family will forever be grateful for you who knew him in his intellectual capacity, who knew him in his professional and academic career, to have created this device, this room, so that people who can't rely on any significant emotional commitment to Omar or memory of Omar, people who may only have heard of him or read about him, may also fulfill their sacred duty of remembering this great man. So on behalf of the family, I really do want to express our deep appreciation for what this event represents, for the kindness and generosity and hard work of all the people that Jean mentioned on her slide, and particularly Jean, for being relentless over these many years in ensuring that this became a reality. So on behalf of the family, we'd just like to say thank you very much for enabling all the people that will walk into this room to fulfill a sacred duty of remembering our friend of ours.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Bowles. I was a longtime classmate of Omar's here. We went to Merck together, worked at Merck for 30 plus years, each one of us. And Jean asked me to say something today, and I have worked with Jean over the past several years as well, and I've learned not to say no to Jean. So here we are. I was at a wedding on Sunday night here in the city, and a young woman was about to get up and give a toast, and she had never done that before. She was going through all the things she had to do, and I remembered some very short advice from work, which was be short and be funny. And it really just completely blew her fuse, because it seemed like she was nowhere near either being short or So as I thought about what to do here, I said I should be short, I should be funny. And I'll try and promise you short, but I can't be sure about be funny. But I really do want to thank Jean. She really, it was really clearly she was driven to make this happen, and she wasn't going to let go of it. And she was tenacious, even as the cost doubled, and we weren't sure what we were going to do, and the department moved and everything else. So really terrific example, and maybe you got some of that perseverance from Omar with his teachings. Yeah, thank you. So a couple of just Columbia things that this is really just a kind of a brief vignette of things that you haven't been told. But in thinking about Omar, one of the things that I remember the most was he was extraordinarily direct. So I wouldn't mind telling you something that others would have considered embarrassing, right? or others would have simply not told you. Not in a nasty way or an aggressive way, but just very matter-of-factly, like, that was a really lousy presentation. that was part of his wonder. So, two stories that stick out, two things that stick out. We worked together as undergraduates. We got a summer going, our junior to senior year. And so we spent time in adjacent labs, working side by side, different professors, different projects. And I worked for Professor Greger, who had quite a reputation, but probably still background radiation is here. Professor Greger, but as an undergraduate, I worked with him and had a radio on in the lab. And one day, Professor Greger came in, which wasn't usual, thank goodness, but he did come in. And so this is the 70s, and the song was played over a C7 chord on the guitar, and the start of it was you put the lime in the coconut, so you'll remember that song if you listen, right? So Omar was there when Professor Greger walked in, and he started talking about the work, and Professor Greger stopped absolutely dead and just listened to the music intently for what seemed like an eternity, right? With this clear sense of, what is that music doing in my laboratory? So Omar told that incident again. He walked back into the other lab laughing. He told me that story, but I remember when Professor Greger came in the lab and you were playing that song on the radio for a few years. So that was one of the undergraduate stories of mischievous sort of things that we were involved in. The other one, though, was in seeing you folks, and I was reminded when Omar talked to us, he's talking in a very eloquent way. He was extraordinarily articulate, that's been said a lot, and extraordinarily intelligent. But when he got together with people from Jamaica at school, like they would gather in the lounge or get together, he was just a different person. And we would wonder, like, so that's the way you speak in Jamaica. Because it wasn't like the way he talked here, or the way you talk here. It was just completely different. And the energy level was just radically different. And it just reminded me that in some ways he was downshifting, maybe, in dealing with all of us. So to Merck, though, since we went to school in the shift between the 60s and the 70s, which is a very, very tumultuous time here at the university, of course, we got out with our degrees, but we were irreverent and skeptical like people of that era were. And then we entered Merck, and we were irreverent and skeptical. And people have talked with such respect for his teaching and his guidance and the like. But when we started at Merck in the 70s, we were, pretty bad. In terms of being skeptical and irreverent. So Paul Schubert is here kind of slinking down in his seat because he'll remember the things that we used to do. And one of the stories I remember really well was a guy in the corner office, his name was Jim Lago, and he was just a huge figure to us because we were entry-level engineers, and he was godlike being in the corner office. He also wasn't, as Omar has been described, a warm and pleasant person. He was very austere, shall we say, but very, very talented engineer. And so we would tell stories about going into his office for a meeting, and they were all disasters because we were always wrong when we were talking about things. But then I remember trading stories of, how to play power games in the office. And so one of the stories and one of the techniques that we talked about was when you come in with your books and everything else, we'll put them on the corner of his desk. And then that takes away his desk as a source of power. That was like 38 years ago. But it was an example of the kind of stuff that we did, having, because we were from that generation of no respect for authority, and then let's see what we can do with the executive director in the corner office. I'll stop with those stories because they might stick if we keep it up. Right? But I think it's really extraordinary that we've been able to do this here. It really is. It's very fitting. Omar, if there's one thing I would say about him in summing up what everyone else has said, which I agree with, was he drenched himself in life. He lived life with a passion. He wanted to learn about everything. He wanted to do everything. And his life really was a model for how we should live our lives. So it's my hope that when people come through these doors in the future and they wonder who that guy was, he really was a guy they should be like. Right? So those are my thoughts. Yes, and I don't have anything funny to say.
among you in many, many ways. Omar's graduating year was a year that I was on sabbatical in Denmark, and I didn't know him as well as the other people in the class. And but there's something very special. I think the reason that I was asked to stand here, other than to fill up space, which I hope I can do in another way, is that I'm probably the history of this place. I came here in 1958, and I've been full-time ever since. And I have observed the passing parade year by year by year. And your class, the class that Omar was in, and many of you were his classmates, was, as Huck already said, singular. It was a class of which you see only a few over the entire span of even a long career like mine. And it's interesting that the class resonates too, in the sense that the class graduated and it was recognized as an outstanding class. And as members of that class went along and developed their careers and reached points of achievement, it came back to us. And now it's come back to us in an incredibly wonderful way that we could not have expected to happen to us. We had expected something might happen to the world and continue to happen to the world as a result of this class. But that this class, on the occasion of remembering Omar, should remember us in such a wonderful way is just really, really important to us. I want to say just a little bit about why a room like this is important and where we think we're going. I particularly noted among the characteristics cited for Omar his capacity for sharing knowledge, his respect for knowledge. And the sharing of knowledge has become a more and more complex project. There is more and more knowledge. That doesn't make it easier to share it. It probably makes it harder to share it. The discerning of what is good knowledge, the discerning of what is ubiquitous knowledge, knowledge which is useful here and useful in other parts of the world, the discerning of what other people in other places are thinking, which hits you in the face, which challenges you, which may contradict you. This is what we have to face up to ourselves, and particularly to make our students aware of. And a room like this, and the facility which it represents, lets us do that. Lets us talk to people in other places. They see us, we see them. Lets us hold meetings with scientific groups that can be as well be in China or India, or with the group that I work with sometimes in Vienna, Austria. Enables us to reach into the internet and pull something up without making a tremendous big deal out of having something there which somebody can work on for a week and get it ready for class, and then maybe it would play okay, maybe it would not. It's going to play okay just fine now because we have the full resources to do it. So I think you've given us a gift which reflects what Omar would want you to have given us, a way of sharing knowledge which rises to the challenges of trying to share knowledge in the 21st century when there is so much knowledge. And I just hope that we can serve your gift to us by sharing it well. Thank you. I think we may be able to get Jordan Spencer here. It's been a ping-pong game the entire afternoon. Jordan isn't used to using Skype, and we finally got Jordan to push the buttons. And then he was sitting in front of a window with a tremendous bright light behind him, and all we saw was shadowy Georgian. But it's worthwhile because we surely have a famous Jordan Spencer story if we can just connect him up. You gonna be able to do it, Edmund?
Video is coming in.
At the moment, Edmund is the key to all things here. We're still in the training course. What?
Look behind you.
Ah, there he is. Aha. Let me get out of the way and let him. Can we get sound with him?
Can you say something, Jordan?
Okay.
Ah, he's speaking. Yes.
Let me turn off cause some background noise?
Omar, be cool.